Hey everybody, so let's talk about this controversial passage about women be silent. Be silent in church. Let's see what does this really mean? Does it mean that women can't even talk, can't sing, can't speak, can't do anything in church? Does it mean that women can do some things and not others? What does it really mean? So we're going to discuss this response from Mike Winger about what he says about what this passage actually means. Mike Winger does a lot of videos on really in depth Bible study, and he takes scholarly material and breaks it down and explains it. He's got a whole Women in Ministry series, so if you want to go and watch that, you can to get additional information. But this is what he has to say about this passage in Corinthians.
For instance, here's a careful reading of Paul. He says they are to subject themselves, which is the opposite of somebody subjecting them.
Okay, so let's look at it real quick. The women are to keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves, just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in church, right? So he says this part that says women are to subject themselves, okay? So he's saying that women are to voluntarily, not be forced, but voluntarily, just as when you stop at a stoplight, you're voluntarily submitting to the law, right? Or when your boss tells you to do something, you're voluntarily submitting to your boss, right? We do it every day. And so, ladies, don't go and be like, I don't submit to anyone. I don't answer to anybody. I do whatever I want. No, you don't. You don't do whatever you want all the time because you have to submit to somebody, right? We all follow rules and laws of the land. Well, if I mean we should be, we should be, right? So let's see what else he has to say about this.
God's counsel to women about roles of submission is always that it's intentional and purposeful. A man who's forcing a woman to submit, that's oppression, that's abuse. A woman who chooses to submit, a child who chooses to submit, an employee who chooses to submit. These are godly ways of honoring Christ and humility and serving in whatever God's given you.
Okay, so if you're a man and you think because this passage is here that you can force a woman to submit, that's not what this passage is saying. He says that that's oppression and that that's abusive. You're not supposed to be forcing us to. We're supposed to be making the decision to do that on our own. This model is set up the same way that God deals with us, right? Does God come and force you to follow his commands? Does he force you to do what he wants you to do? No, he doesn't force anybody. He allows us to make that decision. And if we make the right or the wrong decision, we have outcomes to whatever that may be. So this sounds like the structure is kind of the same as the way that God deals with us. Our God is a gentleman. He doesn't force anybody to come to him. He doesn't force anybody to follow him. And he doesn't force anybody to follow his laws. It's voluntary. It's voluntary. And if we love the Lord and we love God, we will follow his laws and follow what he says because we want to and because we love him, not because we're forced to. If you do something because you're afraid, if you're only doing it because you're afraid you'll get in trouble, or fear someone or something, is it because you actually want to do it? Is it because you feel like it's the right thing to do? Is that why you're doing it? No, you're doing it. That's kind of like a forceful way. So, yeah. So let's continue.
So there's an example of how he'll say subject themselves, and they'll think of it as a trigger term. And I'm like, actually, that's kind of like a women's rights thing, along with biblical. I'm a complementarian. This seems like a complementarian passage here, as opposed to egalitarian, where we would they would kind of push against this text for various reasons. So let's put it in more context. With 1 Corinthians, as a whole, Paul is actually okay with women talking in church. He is, for sure he is. 1 Corinthians 11:5 makes it clear that women were prophesying in the church, and Paul was okay with this.
Okay, so yeah, it doesn't mean that women can't ever speak, women can't ever make a noise or anything like that. It says that, women were prophesying in the church. So, obviously you can't take this so literally.
So they were prophesying in church. In Acts, we get more context of the first century church, where it talks about Philip and how he had 7 daughters that prophesied. So there's women who are speaking, and prophetic speech is a special kind of speech, right? Like they're not just talking in church; they're actually proclaiming truths about God. It's prophecy. They're they're bringing forth stuff under the leading of the Spirit. That word silent, though, it may not be the best translation to say women should keep silent in churches. The word silent, sigao, is the Greek. It means to refrain, or at least one of the meanings, which seems to be the meaning here, to refrain from using a particular kind of speech or speech in a certain context.
So that's interesting, isn't it? That it's a particular kind of speech or a kind of speech in a certain context. So not all speech. It doesn't mean women can't make any kind of sound or peep or anything whatsoever. I mean, because really, I mean, when you're at church, I mean, are you? I mean, I don't. I can't say I've ever been in church and just felt the need like I needed to just talk and talk and talk in the middle of the sermon. Obviously, nobody does that. Everybody just kind of sits silently and listens to the sermon. And, if they have questions, they can always reach out later to the pastor. Or if you're a married woman and your husband is a Christian man, then yeah, of course you could talk to your husband at home if he knows. But I mean, that's not always going to be the case. I mean, how could this apply to all women all the time in that way? Like, oh, you should just be quiet and ask your husband at home. Well, what if you're not married? What if you don't have a husband? What if your husband's an unbeliever? What if your husband is a new believer and you've been a believer for, your whole life? And, I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. So obviously this can't be taken in a literal sense. So, because there's things that are outside of this.
So then we zoom out from verse 34 and 35 and get the context. Here's my interpretation of it for your consideration. The judgment of prophecy is the whole context in verses 29 through 35. We already know in 1 Corinthians 11:5 women can give prophecy in church, but in 1 Corinthians 14 verses 29 through 35, it's about the judgment of prophecy, the evaluation of prophecy. If verses 34 and 35 are seen in that context, then an interpretation seems obvious to me. And I'm going to quote here from Anthony Thistleton, his commentary on 1 Corinthians. He puts it this way: the speaking in question, the speaking that the woman's asked not to do, denotes the activity of sifting or weighing the words of prophets, especially about asking probing questions about the prophet's theology or even the prophet's lifestyle in public.
Okay, so I mean that makes sense if you really think about it. So if if men are the elders, this sounds like an eldership role. Like he explains in another video, this is more of an eldership role that they're taking by interpreting and weighing and all of these things. So that would make sense of why they're saying only the man can do that. Okay, so that makes sense to me.
Where Paul's like, let them ask at home, depending on how the translation renders it. Let them ask their own husbands at home if they want to understand something. The idea is somebody gives a prophecy, a word of the Lord. Could be a man, could be a woman. Then there's the elders and leaders of the church who are considered the faithful, reliable leaders who are in the context of, I believe, Paul's writing supposed to be men. And these guys are judging the prophecy. They're like, let's test that word. And maybe they ask the guy. They ask about the consistency of his walk. They ask if he has endorsements from other church leaders, if he's a guest. Do you have like letters from the church you came from, why we should trust you? They ask him, what did you mean by that? Is that consistent with the theology that we've got from Scripture? They're testing to make sure that this prophetic statement is consistent, if it's from God or not.
So, it's up to the church leaders to decide, whether that prophecy can or cannot be weighed. So they're saying that this is the role of the man in eldership in the church structure. I mean, this is very obvious that this is talking about church structure. I mean, if this is, I don't know how anybody could interpret it any other way. I've seen people in the comments try to say that that this is not in relation to church structure, but I mean, read the whole passage. It's obvious, and what he's saying here, it all relates to church structure.
Test all things, hold fast to that, which is good. So the idea is, and this is consistent in the passage, preserving proper relationships, right? Proper relationships of authority and submission in a godly context, which is not oppressive, but is meant to represent to the world that the church is a place of order. And that's Paul's main concern in 1 Corinthians 14 is order in the church instead of disorder and chaos.
There you have it. So this is about order in the church, not having chaos, having some kind of structure, having some kind of, plan in place that this is how we run things. So this is not just a commandment of just women be silent all the time and whatever. This is about church. This is about what we're doing in the gathering, wherever that may be.
So yeah, that's my interpretation, and people are free to disagree with this, but it's simply saying, hey, ladies are not supposed to be the ones judging and sifting and testing the prophetic statements that happen in the church. If they do have questions, they shouldn't use their questions to probe and poke at stuff. They should just ask those questions at home. But
Yeah, just be respectable and, ask at home or ask, whatever that context may be.
also says that women were present in the fellowship and were part of it and active in the ministry. What do you guys have a follow-up question on that, or did that fit?
So, tell me what you guys think. Do you agree with Mike Winger's interpretation of this passage? Do you disagree? It obviously here is about church structure. All you have to do is go back and read the entire passage. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about that. It doesn't mean that you're a woman and you can't speak in church and you can't do anything and you can't do any kind of ministry roles or anything like that. That's not what it means. It's not what it's referring to. It makes a lot of sense to me what he said. And, this is not my word. This is not me saying, oh, this is what it is because I say it is. No, this is somebody that's done the research, somebody that has looked through scholarship and all of these things. So this is I agree with this interpretation of the passage, and I do think that there should be a structure, and I don't think there's anything wrong with men being elders and being in leadership roles. I for one, I don't want to be. I don't care about that. I don't want to be in any kind of leadership role. That's not my purpose. That's not my purpose here. But yeah, let me know what you think. And I really like it. I really like what he had to say. I think it's very fair, and I think it really interprets it well.